All right, welcome everyone. This is WriteHive 2025. This is our panel, Selecting Your Lens, Choosing Your POV. My name is Julian Grajales. I am a writer, graduate student pursuing an MFA at the City College of New York for creative writing. But mainly, I'm a full-time union organizer, and I have the incredible privilege of moderating this panel, which again is Selecting Your Lens, Choosing Your POV. I am joined here by some really phenomenal authors, a diverse set of authors with skills, life experiences that I think is going to make this discussion really insightful and helpful for those of us who are, racking our brains. What are we trying to do? How are we trying to tell this story? What is the best sort of, point of view that we can tell the story in? But yeah, let's get started with our panelists. I'd like to introduce our panelists now. Let's get started with Holly.
Hi, everyone. My name's Holly Ash. I write science fiction. I just published my eighth book, which you can see kind of other side up here, Sacrificing Serenity. So my background, I have degrees in environmental science and English literature. So I use both of those when I'm writing. And when I'm not writing, I do sustainability work for manufacturing companies.
You, Holly. Happy to have you here. Finian.
Hi, I'm Finnian Burnett. I write mostly contemporary literary, but I love to dip my fingers into everything from speculative to comedy, science fiction, and modern queer retelling of Shakespeare. So I have a lot going on. I always say that I took a non-traditional path to success and that I went to grad school and couldn't write a single word on a novel for many years. And I wrote flash fiction. And then that one of my flash fiction collections ended up getting me a grant to go to England to research for my first novel, and I ended up just getting an agent for that novel. But it all comes from flash fiction, so I'm a big proponent of doing whatever kind of writing you can do to take the path to success.
Great advice, actually. Hing.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hien Nguyen, and I'm a writer of speculative fiction. I write everything from horror, sci-fi, fantasy, but more in that kind of genre blend space. My debut YA speculative thriller comes out this December called Twin Tides. And currently, I'm based in the South, but I've ping-ponged around both coasts and was born in Iowa from the Midwest. And currently, I am writing. I do have a day job at a non-education nonprofit, and also did not, you know, had kind of a different path to writing, right? Because I wrote a lot when I was younger, kind of stopped and then returned to it much later. So very excited to be here and chat with you all today.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes. And last but not least, Tasneem.
Hi everyone, I'm Tasneem Alam. I write supernatural fantasy and dark romance. Inheritance is my second novel that came out last year, and I'm working on my third, hoping to release in September of this year. When I'm not writing, I'm an accountant and dabbling into many other ventures, little small businesses that I've had my eyes on for a little while. So more to come for that.
Awesome. Very exciting. Authors, intros, bios, and of course, the work that you guys are producing is something to really keep an eye out on. So, if you haven't, make sure to do a quick search of our authors and see what they're producing and what's coming out soon or what's already been out. It's always helpful and part of the sort of world that we're trying to build here, right? Okay, so we do have some really good questions, but the first question I wanted to start this whole thing off with is just to sort of situate ourselves and explain why this even matters and contextualize this discussion to our viewers. The first question is, what is POV, right? What is point of view, and why does it matter in storytelling?
So I think first off, point of or POV, point of view, is the lens through which you're going to tell your story. So we know there's a lot of different ways you can go about this. Like we learned in school, there's first person, there's second person, there's third person. And then when you get down further to that, you also have, limited or omniscient. And how are you going to tell your story? And I think this is really important because this decision is really going to frame your whole story. What is the reader going to know? Are they going to know everything? Are they only going to know what your character is going to know? Are you going to do multiple points of view? And that can really have a huge impact, and it has a lasting impact, especially if you're doing something like a series. Because I think changing up that point of view halfway through that series can be really telling for what's coming, and it's going to give a lot away, could drop your reader's interest. So it's really that first important decision you have to make on how you want to tell your story.
Yeah, it's a great definition, great breakdown, and really like holds the stakes for us, right? For the writer, why this matters, why this is so important and crucial to the way we are telling the story. How are we immersing the readers? How are we getting them to really feel for the characters and what's sort of making them tick internally? And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff, right? There's third person limited, omniscient, what Holly was sort of mentioning. Second person can be sometimes less popular sort of perspective or POV, but it can still be very powerful. It all starts with the you know, you reach out to the to open the door and see, what's behind the door. You are the one who are doing the actions as a protagonist in the story. Do you have a preference for POV in your writing and why?
My preference is first person for the most part. Most of my books that I've been writing and have came out with are first person. I prefer it because it feels like I'm the one in it, and as a reader, I can experience the scenes in the book and the story in like real time, I guess. And I also prefer present tense, so it makes it more alive for me.
I call myself POV polyamorous in that I absolutely do not have a hierarchy of choice. I love experimenting in it. In flash fiction, use like first person collective, second person a lot. I love what Tasneem said about the tense because trying a story in different tenses, trying it in future tense can be a great way to experiment with your POV. And my most recent novel is in what I call it's first person direct address. So it is in first person, but it's written to you because it's in an epistolary form. So yeah, I can't be held. I don't ever want to be held to one. I think that the best thing you can do for your writing is just play with POV, even if it's in short stories.
I lean towards third person, but I think I'm like Finny and I jump around. It's just third person is where I started and feel most comfortable with, but often it'll be where I start and decide, you know what, that's not quite the right fit for this story. I will say I do have a soft spot for second person. I do have some shorts in second person, and I would love to write a novel in second person, but that's not in vogue. So that may be like a future me kind of project. But yeah, second person I think is interesting because it's like why you? Why is it me, the reader, right? And it feels almost off-putting, which I think is why it's kind of unpopular. But for me, that's really interesting, right? To play with the story and why you try to make the reader feel kind of uncomfortable.
And I was just gonna say, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm POV monogamous a little bit. So I, so everything I've written so far, with the exclusion of the last book that's come out, has been third person limited POV with dual point of view. So I have two points of view. This new book is the only one that I have a singular point of view in, but it's still third person limited. And I think for me, writing more of that science fiction suspense, there's a lot of information that I don't want my main character or my readers to know until later in the book. So limiting that third person, and I always write in past tense because I think that works better with third person, allows me to play with those twists and turns and those unsuspecting things and that unreliable narrator aspect of it as well.
I'm fascinated by like why folks have the sort of preferences that they do for the point of view and the sort of, first, second, third. But maybe we should jump into that a little bit more deeper. What do you guys think are the pros and cons of like each POV?
Start with second person because Hien and I both love it. That one of the biggest cons is just that people have a perception that it's either trendy or it's, doing it for whatever reason, or that it's distancing. I think that it can be both distancing and really emotionally powerful. So I would say the biggest con of it is just other people's perception, and also that it can be hard if you're the kind of person that's just every one of your sentences is starting with you do this, you do this, you do this. Then it becomes, unless you're doing it on purpose to be lyrical, it can kind of sound as it kind of sound immature. But I would say the biggest pro of it is that it is unusual, and then it does draw the reader in. If you do it well, then the reader is kind of forced to be part of the story because it's happening to them as the narrator. So that's probably my pro and con of second person.
I like doing first person mainly because I do like limiting the narrative um, just because I don't want everyone, the reader or the character, to know what's going to happen in the story, and it just like slowly unravels throughout the series. But I also do switch point of views a lot, especially in my other series, not in Inheritance. That's going to be pretty much the same character. But in my other series, I do switch point of views from different characters, just to give a wider insight for the readers, but also to go into the emotions and feelings and the other characters take on what's going on. So I do like jumping around like that, and it helps storytelling for me.
It is very like immersive, right? Which is one of the big pros. For me, my YA actually is told in both third person and first person between three POVs. And third person is less common in YA because YA you really want that immediacy. But it is multi-POV and there's kind of this balance, right? You can do it in first person, certainly, like tons of romance authors do it. But it also requires the voice being really distinct, right? Because there's that risk in first person if you're doing multiple point of views of them all sounding the same. So for me, it just made more sense. Like I'm going to refer to them themselves in third person, so you always know who you're with during the story, and that's really, I think, a balance for what feels right as you as the writer, versus maybe what is genre convention, which I think we'll talk a little bit about later.
For a third person, one of the big cons that you have to be aware of is making sure you don't distance yourself from your characters too much. It can be hard to get that internal monologue, that internal feeling and emotion sometimes when you're working in third person, if you're only focusing on what's happening externally. And I think this really comes into effect a lot more when you have an omniscious third person where you know everything that's happening. That's why I try to keep mine limited to one character so that you can still have that emotional connection and that reduced lens and scope that you're focusing on. um, so that's one of the things to really look out for a third person. You want to keep it connected to your characters.
Yeah, I've heard people don't like second person sometimes because there's a bit of demand avoidance and you're often being told what to do in second person, right? So just to consider some of the elements also that are happening, right? Because I've also heard, for example, that first person also you can play with the reliability of the narrator with that, right? And that lends itself to another layer, another texture for your story. So this is all really good. I'm curious what you guys like. What methods do you use to decide what POV you want to use in your storytelling for your story idea?
For me, I decide that depending on the kind of story I'm planning for this series. I usually do stick to the same POV. Like if it's first person, it's going to be first person throughout the whole series. Or if it's third person, it'll be third person throughout the whole series. Um, and I decide that based on what kind of genre for me, really. Like supernatural fantasy, for me, it's usually first person just to experience all the shocks that come with supernatural elements. But I have another series that I have planned out that I'm thinking of doing it in third person just to get like an overall world idea of what's going on because it's dystopian for the most part. So to understand it better, I think third person would help with that series.
For me, there's kind of two questions I ask myself, and I did mention I do typically start with third person and figure it out from there. But one is kind of starting with the premise. Who would be the most compelling to kind of witness whatever this premise is, right? And that I call that like my anchor point of view. And from there, does it make sense for there to be more, right? And so for my debut, it's long lost twins. So obviously the twins who have been separated make a lot of sense for those point of views, right? And then the other is thinking about what's convenient versus right for the story. And so as someone who's in the spec fic space, it is, I think, multi-point of view is really common, and that's great. Like, I think I love multi-point of view stories, but I think my inclination sometimes is always to be in multi-point of view, and maybe that doesn't make sense. A good example, I think, is say you're writing a story where there's like a war happening and there's a plot point that happens on the other side of this conflict and you jump to a point of view on that side of the conflict. It's convenient, but if it's not, sometimes it might not be right for the story, right? Because if you jump to that point of view and then all of a sudden you're back in the primary one and you never go back to that other one, it can feel like, oh, this was a choice out of convenience and not because it was right for the story. So for me, it's really kind of asking myself that every time I do a point of view shift, and it's like, okay, am I just doing this because it's easy or because I think it is critical to the story I'm telling?
And to kind of build off of that, because I was going to talk about multiple points of view too. Because again, I almost always write in third person point of view. And then it comes down to how many and who is it going to be and what's going to really facilitate the story. And one thing I will say is keep your points of view characters consistent through a series. So, like he was saying, if you're just going to jump to one person's point of view for one scene or one chapter and never go back to it, challenge yourself to see if there's a different way that you can tell that or infer that without changing that point of view, because that shift can take your reader out. There's one example, and I hope this won't spoil anything, but from like the Divergent series, if you read that series, book 1 and book 2 are purely in singular first person point of view. Book 3 introduces a second point of view. Well, why would that be? Because your first point of view can't finish the story. So you need to have someone else. So that can be a huge giveaway for that twist if you haven't kept that consistent throughout your whole series on why are you suddenly changing it. And what's that going to tell your reader? And will everybody pick up on that? Probably not. But for me, I picked up on it immediately. Oh, we are introducing another point of view because the main character is likely not going to be alive to tell the end of the story, which was the case in that series. So think about your story as a whole when you're choosing who are your characters going to be. And I will say from experience, you might get it wrong and you may write a scene in someone's point of view that you're going to have to scrap and rewrite from another point of view. But honestly, that's a fantastic exercise to really flesh out your world, flesh out those characters. To even if you're stuck, write it in someone else's point of view and then go back to the point of view of the story and rewrite it from that scope once you have that better understanding of how that world and that scene works.
Wow, there's a lot there to sort of dissect and break down, but I hope folks are taking notes in their notebook as folks are watching this because there is a lot. And there's two things here that our panelists were just pointing to, and I think I want to see if we can go a little deeper into that, right? Because Tasneem and Hing were talking about like their genres and the point of views that are helpful for those genres or for the story elements that they're trying to sort of lift to the surface and really have an impact. So I guess can we talk a little bit more about that? Like what POVs are better suited for specific genres? And also maybe or maybe not to complicate too much, but maybe something to consider is how does the choice of that POV for that genre or otherwise sort of help lift story elements to the forefront of your storytelling?
I don't think there is any right answer to that. It's author's preference, I want to say, because how I want to tell the story also plays into how I'm telling the story, right? And what I want my readers to like what information I want my readers to know. That's basically like the book I'm working on right now. I'm having a little trouble with trying to figure out which information would need to come out like at which time. It doesn't make sense for the not the main character to reveal this information if I'm just going to repeat it again when this person is going to reveal it to the main character, but we already know about it, so it's kind of repetitive. So it's a lot of like just playing around with it and seeing what fits throughout the novel. And again, with genre, I think personal preference for me, YA romantasy or supernatural fantasy is more fun when it's first person. As a reader, I like reading it as for in first person just because I get to like shut my brain off and go into a whole new world and experience it in my mind, I guess. But with I notice with like dystopian or utopian fantasies or books, I like the third person just because I want to know why everything is happening and why certain societies are created the way it is. It just gives me an better overview of it. So that's again just preference. I think it just comes down to and whatever fits the story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, Lord of the Rings had to be omniscient, right? Because how else are you getting all of that history of the elves and all of the various language and all of that? For myself, Holly and I were talking earlier, she's a pantser and I'm a plotter. So I know who has to have the biggest emotional arc in my story before I start. In my last novel, it's a journey of a trans man trying to come to terms with the fact that his mother dead named him on her deathbed and trying to recover that. That had to be in first person. Nobody else had a right to have an arc in that story, right? Like, and so his arc mattered. But the novel I'm currently working on is a big family drama where everybody has their own stories and everything has the things that happened to them that led to what's happening in the events of the plot. So before I even start writing, I know that I'm going to have at least three people that have a big emotional arc throughout the course of my book. And so that's going to have to be a third person alternating point of view because they all get a chance to dive into their backstories in a way that a first person narrator never could.
Yeah, I definitely agree with both Tasneem and Finian. It's really preference. That said, I will speak on maybe the less fun part of being a writer is that there is your preference and also the market's preference and just being aware of it, right? You don't have to follow the market. You don't have to follow the rules. But if you're aware of it, you know when you're kind of going against convention and just expect it. So as I mentioned, YA, I think first person is very common. And again, I told my YA in third person and first person. But that person point of view was actually originally second person. So it's a ghost point of view and I was asked to change it. And I was okay with that. I knew going in, I knew like second person is unpopular. I will have to be prepared to deal with it. So I was okay with that. But as a writer, being prepared, I guess, doing your research so you're not kind of maybe surprised if we just don't resonate with something or you're asked to change it. Just because there are in the current 2025 landscape, there are conventions that are more popular. I love third person omniscient. I do think it's a really hard sell right now. I feel like not a lot of new books are being sold as third person omniscient. So just be aware, so you're not kind of disappointed if you have to adjust or pivot.
That kind of feeds into one of my favorite writer rules because you do have to take market expectations and reader expectations into account. So I always tell people when they ask, first you have to know the rules so that you can break them with purpose. So you have to have a reason if you're going to go against that market convention and those reader expectations.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you know what you're doing, if you know what is expected of your reader, then at least you know how you're changing and how things are being changed and how you can change them in a clever way that maybe has not been seen, right? Or maybe has been seen, but you want to add something, some other element to it. So this is, I completely agree. There is always this tension between what we're trying to do, what gratifies us, what stories we think are powerful that we think people should be hearing these days, and also what sells. Right? That's the unfortunate sort of push and pull of the commodification of storytelling, right? But here we are, and if we have the tools to know what's happening, why it's happening, we can mix and match and do it to our benefit, to our insight, to our intentional purpose. So the next question sort of I wanted to sort of touch on or jump on because there has been some talk about like, maybe I have multiple characters in a story and so I want to do different points of view and I want to jump around. So I guess I want to and usually I've always heard, at least in sort of the classes that I'm taking and some of the craft books that you read, is that you don't really want to switch point of view all that often because it can be confusing. And if you're not doing the right thing to sort of like signify that you're in a different perspective or whatever, you can lose the reader's interest. So I guess I'm wondering, what other times is it okay, if at all, maybe you don't think it is, to alternate point of views in a single story?
I almost exclusively write in dual point of view. So I alternate between points of view quite frequently in my books. Um, and I think one of the things to keep in mind is I will never change point of view in the middle of a scene. There will always be a break. So whether it's a scene break or a chapter break, then which I also kind of indicate with larger spacing or maybe some kind of graphic in the text so that you're aware that you're changing scenes and that that point of view is likely to change. I don't put character names on mine since my books are adults, and that's not typical in adult literature. So you have to have a strong voice. Your characters have to have a very distinct voice, a very distinct way that they tell their story through their point of view, um, so that the reader can follow. So I am having to alter that style every scene, every other scene on, is this person more conservative, more strict by the rules? Are they, more sarcastic or a go-getter? And use those types of context clues to let my reader know we've changed that point of view immediately through the voice of that text.
I actually do put character names when I switch point of views, and I don't switch point of views that often, but every chapter, whenever I start it, or the current book that I'm working on, it's really the one that I am switching point of views now. I do put their name right after their chapter title, um, just to help transition, I guess. Like as a reader, I'll get confused if character POV switch. So I do like having that break, like clear break. And sometimes throughout the chapter, their POVs will also shift. And I only do that when I feel like it's necessary that this new POV needs to be there for more information that the main character might not have and cannot have at that moment. Um, but it's important because I think as readers, it's also like we want to know why. Like, where did this person go, or what is this person doing? Why is this person missing? Why is there so much drama around it? So I think that helps with uh like when I switch it. Like that's just how I like doing it.
I think it's so much easier in third person than in first because
Mhm.
in third person you have the character's name in there, and so it's easy to ground them in like their name and their interiority in the, like indirect free discourse that they're having about the events of the plot. Whereas in first person, you really have to find a way to make sure that the reader knows who they followed into this alternating. I've never done an alternating first person point of view. I've read some that have been amazing, but the authors really make sure to just ground us right away, find some way to say the name or find some way to make sure that we know who's having the point of view.
Yeah, as a YA writer, I do use those chapter headings of the different point of views, and I do stick to a scene at least before switching point of views and not doing it. You don't want to kind of head hop, I think is the term people most often use. And to kind of reiterate what I said before is to make sure I'm not just doing it because it's convenient. And I think that's my first it's still unfinished. My first novel I attempted to write was a lot of fun, but I like jump point of view like every other paragraph. And so I look at it fondly as like, this is what I was doing, and it makes sense as I was learning kind of how to write. And I may revisit it at some point. But that was definitely because I'm like, this was easier just to move over to this point of view. Um, and in terms of thinking about why you might need one, an example is the ghost point of view I have is there specifically because it is witnessed life that these young 18-year-old girls have not witnessed, right? There is a kind of a past storyline that is prominent and part of the story. And so that was necessary to have that point of view. So to echo other points, like what is necessary for your story, what makes sense, and to kind of go from there. But I do think it's technically always okay if you want to do it. Just know like when you do it, you're going to invite more scrutiny, I guess, because the advice for newer writers is like, don't jump to POV too much, stay in one timeline, all of that. And all these things you can do and books do well all the time, but they're just gonna have people paying attention to it in a way that they wouldn't necessarily, like a single POV, single timeline. Just because they're like, well, you made this choice, why? And so making sure that all the point of views feel compelling to the reader.
I also want to add in, like as switch my point of view from an author to a reader, like what whose character point of view do I want to know for a certain scene as well. So that's also something I keep in mind when I switch point of views or decide if I need to.
Yeah, totally. Sometimes the point of view is about determining who is actually the character who is best telling the story that you really want to convey, right? But there's a lot of other things that you guys said that was really, really good, which one of them, for example, is that like if you're going to do first person, you have to have like a very distinct voice perhaps for your character. And if you're going to switch to another person, another kind of distinct voice. But I'm curious, like what sort of about this topic, right? What can we do? What tips and tricks would you guys suggest to readers, or I'm sorry, to writers in particular, about being able to signify those things? What else could we do as writers to ensure that readers are able to follow whose perspective we're in any given moment at the story?
Remember to stay as cl in close narrative distance so that instead of, the sun was shining, Holly felt the sun, that sort of thing, so that you're just always grounding everything through the notice of what your character is feeling, that just having like sensory input, how is setting affecting them, and kind of just trying to stay a deep point of view, or at least kind of a close narrative distance as opposed to a middle distance where it feels kind of generic and it could be happening to anybody.
So I was going to kind of build off of that and say, don't forget to use like your setting and where your character is to help ground your point of view and how do they interact with that setting. So I have in one of my series, Cleansing Rain, I have a dual point of view. One of the characters is kidnapped and the other one's looking for her. So they're in very, very different physical places when we're alternating between points of view. But in my first series, the journey missions, the two main characters are often together, but they have a very different way that they see the world, one being from the alien planet and one being from Earth. So things that are normal to one are not normal to the other. And you can use your setting to really kind of help ground which character we're seeing the world through at that moment.
Yeah, I echo all of that. Having that voice, regardless if it's first person or third person, and what I like to do is really mapping out the characters of those point of views, right? Because each of them will be different, and how they view the world and notice the world will be different, as Holly was saying. But even just how they kind of narrate their own story will be different. And so for my two twin point of views, one was raised in a very wealthy upper class background, and the other was not. She's very much working class, but goes to Georgetown University, which is a private school. And so I had to think about how they would notice things around them. And the first twin, Caliste, notices designer brands because they're part of her life. She just knows that's, Dior or whatever. The other twin, Arya, notices those things in a much less detailed way, but in a way that, like, I know how much that costs, and I know that's not in my reality, right? So there's a different way they perceive the exact same thing, and making that clear in the narrative. So I think, drafting is always a process of kind of figuring things out, but I suggest after the drafting process to really sit down, like, okay, who is this character? What do they notice? How do they think about the world? Um, what is their personality, right? How would they refer to the sunlight? Person might be like, oh, screw the sunlight, I hate sun. And the other character's like, wow, it's a beautiful day. So figuring out like the exact same kind of thing, how would both characters or whatever characters you're writing about, how would they perceive that exact same thing, and think about that while you're writing their point of views.
For first person, what I like doing, like I said, I do mention their character names after the start of the chapter or like after the chapter name title. But for Inheritance, what I did was the first four chapters was from a different character who was eventually killed off. But she wasn't the main character. She was never going to be the main character. Um, so after it was like a very long prologue, but because it was four chapters, I was like I couldn't just title it as a prologue. So I started kind of like sectioned the book like that. And then the rest of the book is in the main character's point of view. But we needed that background information on how the main character came into this world. So that was kind of how I did it for Inheritance. I don't plan to do it for the rest of the books in the series, but yeah, it was necessary. So I just went with what felt right.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think you guys raise like another element, right? Because we've talked about like, okay, what POV does the story need to be impactful? What POV might the genre convention demand or ask? And also, how do we blow it apart and recombine it however we want, right, to be impactful for the story? But the other, I think, is what you guys are talking about, right? What is actually ticking behind the character, the protagonist, or the characters whose point of view that you're looking at, right? What do they like? What do they desire? What misbelief, right? This is the common thing, right? The misbelief, the wound, the whatever, the mother wound, whatever it is that people call it. What is making them tick? And oftentimes that gives you a sense of their personality, and with that personality, you can really enrich this in the case of what Tasneem's saying, like first person point of view, right? Really enrich it and give them a very distinct voice, and that's something that we've talked about in the past. So that's another element here that I'm sure we can't really get into too much, but I'm sure hopefully other panelists and other panels at Right Hive 2025 and before may have touched on this. So I really encourage folks to take a look at some of that stuff. Um, so I guess, we've touched on different elements of POV, and the different ways, these things can manifest, and maybe we can write them out, or things that we should consider, right? I'm wondering if you guys have any like examples of novels or stories that really do this so well and effective that we can maybe encourage our viewers to take a look at if they want to, like, hey, a good second person story, you might want to take a look at this book. They do it so well.
I just want to give a shout out to Margaret Atwood's short story collection, Stone Mattress. The first three stories in that are all in third person limited from three different characters who are connected in minute ways. And I call it a master class in point of view in third person limited because the voices are, they never falter. It never slips. If they took the names out, I think that you would still know which character's point of view you were in because it is just so beautifully grounded in that character's voice. So I think if you want just an absolute masterclass in three stories, the first three stories of Stone Mattress would 100% be my recommendation.
The first one that came to mind for me was Wool by Hugh Howey for alternating point of views and seamlessly transitioning from one character's point of view to another without losing that plot in the story or necessarily giving anything away. There's a lot of alternating there, and I think it's just done really well and in a really unexpected way to really enhance that overall story through different characters' perspectives. And it's done seamlessly throughout the novel.
I will say for fantasy sci-fi readers, the Locked Tomb series, specifically throughout the books, there are point of view shifts, like even in the language, like switching from whatever person. And specifically the second book, Hero of the Ninth, is in second person. And there is a very specific reason you find out by the end. And so it's one of those books where I'm sure some people read it and just did not like it because it's in second person. But if you vibe with it, by the end, you're like, oh, that's why this is in second person. And it's just such a impactful kind of discovery as a reader. So if you're into SFF, I definitely suggest checking out those series.
I just wanted to put in a plug for one book that I think really does this well. It's The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. So like it's when you read it, I don't want to make spoilers or spoil too much because I do think that trilogy is just so good and it's more recent, so I don't want to ruin it for folks. But the first book, it's like you have three different point of views, and it one of them is uh first person, the other is second person, and the other is like third person limited, and it's just the way it all kind of comes together at the end is phenomenal. And I think this is something that, as writers, folks should consider. Sometimes, like, having a shift in POV in your book can really just like make things come together thematically or story-wise. I was reading another book that came out more recently, is The Saint of Bright Doors. Um, uh, the author escapes my mind right now, and I'm so sorry to the author. But The Saint of Bright Doors, the whole time it's almost like third person, and then at the very end to like really just hit you with the impact of the story, it shifts. And I don't want to say why, but it's just so good, so good, and it completely changed the book for me or the story for me. So those are, I think, maybe some other suggestions that folks could, our viewers can take a look at for inspiring point of view and how it's done, and master classes that other authors have done for us and shown how it can be done effectively.
More along the lines of studying point of view, and this one might be a little bit more unconventional, but I think if you look at the first Hunger Games book compared to the first Hunger Games movie, it shows an excellent difference between the book is purely in that first person limited point of view, where those movies are more told in that third person all knowing and adds in that additional scene. So if you really want to see and try and understand like the difference between the scope and the storytelling methods, both I think are what are excellently done for their medium, but it's a big shift in that point of view, going from the book in first person to the way the movies are told and bringing in all those additional scenes outside of Katniss's point of view, that we get from her perspective in the book. I think it's a really interesting comparison on how point of view can change the way a story's told and feels.
A book that I recently read, The Guest List by Lucy Foley. While it wasn't my typical genre that I read, the murder mystery aspect of it and the different perspectives, like I think it was like 7 to 11 different point of views. Every chapter was a different character, but it did return back to that character. And I thought it was a great way of kind of just like everyone's take on what happened and where everyone was during the murder, I guess. And then what we all like, it was a book club book. What we all noticed was that one character was like their point of view was just missing. And we were like, okay, well, we know that person's the one who got murdered, but we never like got his perspective of it or his point of view on it. And I probably just gave away the book, but it was very well done, I thought. I usually don't like that many point of views in a book. Like I think three is like my max that I usually prefer. But yeah, it was well done. So if anyone wants to like explore or do some experiment or research on it, that's a book I would recommend reading.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Yeah, and there are so many books and so many authors who are really challenging the conventions of perspective, of POV. So really encourage folks to just, go out there and read and look up, see what you can find on your own in regards to this. This stuff is so challenging. The POV, it's so important to like just the very basic foundation of your stories that like if you don't get it right, you got to come back to it maybe as our panelists have said, maybe try different POVs, maybe try different characters for your storytelling and for your book, for what's going to be most impactful. Are there any other like tips or tricks? Because I know Holly had a great one about like, try this for POV. Are there other tips and tricks that you guys might recommend or suggest or um, ask or yeah, tell our viewers to keep in mind as they're writing?
Holly mentioned it earlier, but just writing in the different point of views, right? Even just seeing chapter that to get away from thinking like, oh, if I had to delete it, it's a waste. Like, no, writing is a waste, right? Because if it helped you get better at something or discover something, then it's definitely productive. So, uh, honestly, if you're struggling, sit down, try to write a scene like, okay, if I switch the point of view, or if I switch just the language, I moved it from first to second to third, what is lost, what is gained? And that I think just gives you a lot of insight into both your writing and maybe the particular story you're telling.
I've tried many different point of views when I don't have a commitment to one. Like if I have a new story idea and I haven't decided which point of view I wanted to be in, I do try out like first person or third person and see which one fits better for the storytelling. So I do recommend, seeing what works and try different like many different drafts and see, what ends up sticking. Yeah.
I just want to say, and this is more in revision than in drafting, but something I see so much with my coaching clients and the students in my classes is the head hopping. And so, if you're, for example, in this person's point of view, go through and read every sentence. And whenever you have anything that shows someone else's emotions or what someone else might be thinking, ask yourself, why do we know this if we're in third person limited or first person? Because it's really easy to do. You have two people, they're having a conversation, and one says something heated, and then he's just so mad, he's all riled up, but we're not in his point of view, so we can guess that he's mad or we can perceive that he's mad, but we don't know what he's actually thinking. So I would say that just be really careful about that, because for me, that takes me so fast out of a book if the point of view shifts a lot like that.
And one way to kind of build off of that, to work around that kind of head hopping, is what does your point of view character see? What are the physical cues that they can read that say that person's mad? Are their veins popping? Are their hands clenched? So there's ways we can infer it without stating how they feel. And then I just wanted to kind of add, with the experimenting and rewriting your scenes in different points of view, that's great post-publication marketing material. Those are your bonus scenes and special features that you can share with your writers and show them the different kind of perspectives, even if they don't make it into your books. So they're going to help enhance the scene because you're going to know what other people are thinking when you go to write that final version. And you can always use that as your marketing tool. We all complain, marketing's the worst part. Use what you're writing, leverage that for your marketing.
Thank you all. One of the things, just to sort of throw in another question here, insofar as like the research aspect, right? Like, what research sometimes is helpful for POV when you're in the sort of foundational, sort of just beginning to come up with your story? Is there research that you guys might suggest is helpful, or something connected to your story that might help with POV? What would you guys suggest insofar as like research for writers, facing this challenge?
Honestly, read widely in whatever genre you're trying to write, because that gets to knowing conventions and rules so you can break them. Because if you're maybe starting to write in a genre you don't really read widely on, it would be kind of a waste to start a story then realize actually this is like completely out of left field for this genre, right? So read and be kind of curious. Read books you might not pick up otherwise, right? Because you want to kind of know what other folks are doing. That would be my chief suggestion in terms of research before you kind of embark, or when you do embark on writing a story.
I'd add that if your character has a hyper focus on something, or if they have a career that you don't do in real life, that's also going to be part of your research. I just read this really great book called Interesting Facts About Space by I think it was Emily Austin, but the character in there is hyper focused on everything to do with space, and it became very realistic because of that character's point of view that this is just something that they're obsessed with. So, regardless, I don't know how much the research the author did or if they just really know everything about space. But that same thing kind of applies for your character's job. If your character works at the Coca-Cola plant, you're going to have to do so much research about that because to them, it's natural to talk about like jargon and that sort of thing. And so the more realistic your jargon can sound, the better it'll be.
Yeah, it's great. I think oftentimes the rhythms and rhymes of people's everyday life really shapes who you are and how you think and see the world, and the metaphors you come up with, or whatever it may be. So I guess I just want to open it up to see if you guys have any questions you want to pose to the audience, not to the audience, to us other panelists here, or if there are other final suggestions or tips and tricks that you guys want to give to our viewers before we, maybe lead towards wrapping up this panel.
Well, I have a tip that I always use since I do tend to write with multiple points of view. And as Vinny mentions, I am a pantser. So I don't always go in knowing exactly what point of views I'm going to be sticking with and who's telling what part of the story. So for me, what's really key is when I go to do my second draft, which for me is always a complete rewrite of my first draft. I make a scene list and I spell out every single scene. And the first thing I determine is what point of view is that scene going to be in and why? Who is going to tell this part of the story and what is the purpose we're trying to get across from them for the reader and for the characters? So even if you're a pantser, you can go back on those later revisions and really ask yourself the questions and making sure that you're choosing what's best for the story even if it might not be the most fun to write or how you originally wrote it. I can't tell you how many times I've had to rewrite scenes in different points of view because there was something that was missing or wasn't working because a character didn't have the right information or weren't seeing it through the right lens. So make sure you're open to that. Point of view is not necessarily fixed.
One of my tips would be just during the editing process when you have beta readers and their feedback, and ask them, like straight up ask them just to like look out for the point of view, like if that makes sense, like is that necessary? Could that be like, did we like it? Or could it have been implemented a different way through the main character's point of view? Just like the necessity of it. Um, and I think that is very important. Like, whose head do we want to be in for which scene? I do ask my editors and my beta readers to look out for that. So,
I think Hien said something so important earlier that we didn't stop to touch on that is so important for people to take away, which is that every time you write, you're doing something good for your writing. Like a violinist doesn't play a concert every time they play their violin, but every time they play scales, they're making their violin playing better. That same thing with writing. So you have nothing to lose if you try to write a story in, say, first person collective and explore the we narrator, or try to write something in second person future tense, because it's going to be fixing or helping you to hone any of your point of view talents, regardless of if you ever use that in a book. And nowadays with Patreon, like anything I play with is just going to go on Patreon, whether it's ever going to be submitted anywhere or put in any collection anywhere. So, like, don't be afraid to just take the time to play with point of view.
That's great. Yeah, we ultimately we are creatives who are producing things. So if we can just consider that, like the more we produce these things, the better we get at them. Maybe we can let go of the baggage of it being perfect or it having to be, this way or that way. Who cares? Who cares? We're wordsmiths and we're, sharpening our tools. So, right? And writing is never one layer of paint, right? Writing is always several layers, several textures, several outlines, several, et cetera, before we get to, the work of art that we want to put out to the public. I've learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much for this conversation, this discussion, all the insight and all the experience that you guys leverage to this topic and have shared here with our viewers. I think it's going to be super helpful, and there's a lot to consider. There's always so much more that we can go into, really deep into the weeds of this stuff. But I think, this is the sort of start of your journey for folks to go out and, sharpen your craft, sharpen your tools and test out things with your POV and just think about the best way you're going to convey your story. Thank you guys. And yeah, again, these are authors. You should go check out their stuff. I wonder if we should just go around and maybe encourage one last time a final plug in for the stuff that we're working on, and where people can find us.
So again, I write science fiction. I have two complete series out. One's called The Journey Missions. It's a 5-book series. It's like Star Trek, but underwater. I also have a duology called The Cleansing Rain duology that's out. That's more near future sci-fi with eco-terrorism and an end of the world plot. And my latest book, Sacrificing Serenity, follows a widowed mother as she's moving her kids out of a highly polluted planet to a protected town, a bubble colony, and realizes something there is affecting their memories. So, kind of a sci-fi suspense mystery. You can find my books on Amazon or Audible, and you can follow my social medias on all platforms at Holly Ash Writer.
Holly just got me super excited because I am a major Star Trek nerd. In fact, so this is related. I have two flash fiction collections. One's called The Clothes Make the Man, about a trans man trying to disrupt his dysphoria through clothing. And then the next one is The Price of Cookies, which is all various flash fiction stories that take place in the same small town. But the third novella in Flash, which is coming out this year, is called Red Shirts Sometimes Survive. And it's all stories about, for example, queer and various other identities of marginalization, kids and adults who find their found family through loving Star Trek and through fandom. So I'm very excited that you called your story Star Trek but underwater, so I'm definitely going to have to read that. And I can be found on finburnett.com. It's really easy. I'm a full-time writer and teacher, our workshop presenter, so I have a lot of classes and books, but they're all on my website.
My debut YA, Twin Tides, comes out December of this year. It's available for pre-order, and you can also request on NetGalley if you would like to try to read it in advance. It is about two long-lost Vietnamese American twins who reunite in a small town to investigate their mother's murder and must outsmart someone or something that is watching their every move. And I also have a bunch of short fiction and nonfiction pieces published online. You can find that at my website, authorhing.com. And I'm also on a bunch of different social media platforms as Author Hien. So if you find one, I'm probably there somewhere.
So my book, As Worlds Tilt and Inheritance, they're part of two separate series, but they're all in the same world. All my supernatural series will be in the same world. They're all intertwined. As Worlds Tilt is part of the Wolf Girl series. They're shapeshifters, werewolves, and then Inheritance is part of the Cursed and the Damned series. They're vampires. And I'm working on my third book, Truths Collide, which is the second book to As Worlds Tilt, which is coming out in September 2025. Again, dark romance, supernatural fantasy, a lot of curses and family drama involved in it. Um, Family trees, history of supernaturals, and the origins of it. Um, and you can find me at an Amazon Kindle, Kindle Unlimited. They are free with Kindle Unlimited, and I'm on social media platforms as Tasneem Alam, the writer.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Again, my name is Julian Grajales. I don't have much stuff out there, but if you want to, I don't know, because you're bored, peruse, check out jgrajales.com. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists in particular. I really encourage everyone to check out the rest of the panels and past panels and enjoy Write Hive 2025. Peace, everybody.